Rebecca wiped down the same table for the third time that morning, her mind somewhere far away from the small diner where she'd been working for the past 3 years. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air, mixing with the sound of clinking plates and the low hum of conversation from the breakfast crowd. She was 28 now, though some days she felt much older. The uniform she wore, a simple blue dress with a white apron, had become like a second skin. She knew every stain on every booth, every crack in the vinyl seats, every squeak in the floorboards. This place had become her whole world, and she wasn't sure how that had happened. There was a time when Rebecca had bigger dreams. Much bigger dreams. In the corner of her small apartment, pushed against the wall and covered with a bedsheet, sat a black piano. She hadn't touched it in 8 months. Before that it had been 6 months. The gaps kept getting longer. When she was a little girl, that piano had been everything to her. She'd started lessons when she was 6, and from the very first moment her fingers touched those keys, something clicked. Her teacher said she had natural talent, the kind you couldn't teach. Her parents had been so proud, driving her to competitions on weekends, sitting through hours of practice sessions, recording every recital on their old camcorder. By the time she was in high school, Rebecca was performing at state competitions. She won awards, real ones, with certificates and small cash prizes. Her teacher told her parents that she could go far, maybe even study at one of the big music schools. Rebecca remembered the day she got accepted to Juilliard with a partial scholarship. She'd screamed so loud that her mother came running, thinking something was wrong, but life has a way of changing plans. Her mother got sick during Rebecca's senior year of high school. It started with headaches that wouldn't go away. Then the diagnosis came. Cancer. The word seemed to suck all the air out of the room when the doctor said it. Everything changed after that. The medical bills started piling up fast. Insurance covered some of it, but not nearly enough. Her father worked double shifts at the factory, but it still wasn't enough. Rebecca watched her parents age 10 years in the span of months, saw the stress lines deepen around her father's eyes, heard her mother crying quietly when she thought no one could hear. The decision to turn down Juilliard wasn't really a decision at all. How could she leave? How could she go pursue her dreams while her family was falling apart? She deferred for a year, then another year. Eventually, she stopped calling them back. Instead, she enrolled at the community college nearby. She could live at home, help take care of her mother, and still study music. It wasn't Juilliard, but it was something. Her teachers there were good people, and they recognized her talent right away. They pushed her, encouraged her, told her she still had a future in music. She spent 2 years getting her associate degree in music, balancing classes with hospital visits and helping around the house. Her mother got better for a while. The treatment was working. There were good days mixed in with the bad ones. Rebecca held on to those good days like lifelines. After graduation, she started applying for jobs. Music teacher positions mostly, a few performance opportunities here and there. But the market was tough, and the positions that did open up didn't pay enough to help with the bills that kept coming. Her mother needed ongoing treatment, medication, follow-up appointments. The financial strain never really went away. That's when she took the job at Miller's Diner. It was supposed to be temporary, just until something better came along. Just until she could get her foot in the door somewhere. Just until things settled down at home. 3 years later, she was still there. The regulars at the diner loved her. Old Mrs. Chen, who came in every Friday for the meatloaf special, always left her an extra-large tip. The construction workers who filled the place during lunch rush knew she'd remember their orders without writing them down. The owner, a gruff but kind man named Frank, told her she was the best waitress he'd ever had. Rebecca appreciated the kindness. She really did. But every compliment about her waitressing skills felt like a reminder of what she wasn't doing. Every "you're so good at this" was another nail in the coffin of her music career. She still played sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep. She'd pull the sheet off the piano, sit down in the darkness of her apartment, and let her fingers remember what they used to know. But it hurt more than it helped. Each time she played, she was reminded of how much time had passed, how rusty she'd gotten, how far away her dreams seemed now. Her technique was slipping. She could feel it. The pieces that used to flow effortlessly now required concentration. Her fingers stumbled over passages she'd once played perfectly. It was like watching herself fade away piece by piece. The other waitresses at the diner didn't know about her past. Why would they? It wasn't relevant to getting orders right or keeping the coffee fresh. She was just Rebecca, the reliable one who picked up extra shifts and never complained. But sometimes, when the radio in the diner played classical music, which wasn't often, she'd feel something twist in her chest. She'd recognize the pieces, remember performing them, remember the feeling of losing herself completely in the music. Those moments hurt the most. Her mother had recovered, which was the only thing that mattered. The treatment had worked and she was in remission now, healthy, happy, alive. Rebecca told herself that was worth everything she'd given up. And it was. Of course it was. But sometimes in the quiet moments between customers, Rebecca wondered about the other version of her life. The one where she'd gone to Juilliard. The one where she'd become a concert pianist. The one where music wasn't just a painful memory but a living, breathing part of her everyday existence. She'd catch herself humming sometimes while she worked. Complex melodies that most people wouldn't recognize, Chopin, Debussy, Rachmaninoff. The music was still there, buried deep inside her, even if she rarely let it out anymore. The hardest part wasn't the physical work of waitressing or the long hours on her feet. It was the feeling that she was living the wrong life, that somewhere out there was the person she was supposed to be, and with each day that passed, that person slipped further away. Rebecca had stopped talking about music with her family. It made her mother feel guilty, even though Rebecca insisted it wasn't her fault. It wasn't anyone's fault, really. Life just happened and you dealt with it. You made choices and you lived with them. But the piano stayed in her apartment, covered but not gone. She couldn't bring herself to sell it even when money was tight. It felt too much like giving up completely, like admitting that the dreams were really and truly dead. Every now and then, usually late at night after a long shift, she'd uncover it and just sit there on the bench without playing. She'd rest her hands on the keys, not pressing down, just touching them, remembering. This was her life now. Coffee refills, burger orders, tired feet, and polite smiles. And maybe that was okay. Maybe this was enough. Maybe dreams were just things you had when you were young and didn't know any better. But deep down, in a place she didn't like to visit too often, Rebecca knew the music was still alive inside her. Waiting, hoping, ready for one more chance. If she could ever find the courage to give it one. It started on a Tuesday afternoon during the lunch rush. Rebecca was carrying a tray of dishes back to the kitchen when she heard it, a melody playing on the small radio behind the counter. Clair de Lune, Debussy, one of the pieces she used to play. Without thinking, she started humming along, perfectly matching the complex melody. Her feet moved in rhythm as she pushed through the kitchen doors, still humming. Completely lost in the memory of performing that piece at a competition when she was 16. Whoa, hold up, Danny called out from his station at the grill. He was the line cook, a guy in his early 30s with tattoos covering both arms and a surprisingly gentle personality. You know this song? Rebecca snapped back to reality, realizing what she'd been doing. Oh yeah, it's Debussy. Classical music. No, I mean like really know it, Danny said, flipping a burger. You were humming every note. That's not casual radio listening. That's different. She shrugged, trying to play it off. I used to play piano. Long time ago, used to play? What do you mean used to play? This came from Maria, one of the other waitresses who was grabbing an order. Like in school. Sort of. I studied music in college. Danny stopped what he was doing and turned around completely. Wait, what? You have a music degree? Just from community college. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal? Maria laughed. Girl, you've been holding out on us. Can you still play? Rebecca felt her face getting warm. This wasn't a conversation she wanted to have. I don't really play anymore. I haven't in a while. But Danny wasn't letting it go. For the rest of the shift, every time Rebecca came into the kitchen, he had questions. What instrument? What kind of music? Why'd you stop? Have you played recently? It was relentless. By the end of the week, somehow the entire staff knew. Frank, the owner, mentioned it while she was clocking out. Danny tells me you're some kind of piano player. I wouldn't say that, Rebecca replied, grabbing her purse. I took lessons as a kid, studied it a bit. That's all. Frank nodded slowly, like he was filing that information away for later. She didn't think much of it at the time. The teasing started the following Friday. Miller's Diner had been hosting open mic nights every Friday for about 2 years now. It was Frank's idea. He thought it would bring in more customers and give the place some character. Usually they got local comedians trying out new material, a few singers, sometimes a guy with a guitar. The quality varied wildly, but people seemed to enjoy it. Rebecca had worked through dozens of these open mic nights. She'd serve drinks, clear tables, and clap politely for whoever was performing. It was just another shift, usually a busy one because of the crowd. That Friday, Danny started in as soon as she arrived for her shift. "Tonight's the night, Rebecca. You should get up there." "Get up where?" "On stage. Show everyone what you can do." She laughed it off, but Danny kept at it. Then Maria joined in. Then Luis from the kitchen. By the time the dinner rush started, it had become a running joke among the staff. "Rebecca's going to perform tonight. Can't wait to hear you play. You're going to blow everyone away." She rolled her eyes and tried to focus on her tables, but they wouldn't let it drop. Every time she went to the kitchen window to pick up an order, someone made a comment. It was all in good fun, and she knew they didn't mean anything by it, but it made her uncomfortable. That part of her life was private, locked away, and she didn't want to open it up again. The weeks went by, and the teasing continued. It became a ritual. Every Friday, the staff would encourage her to perform at open mic night. Every Friday, she'd laugh it off and refuse. It was harmless enough, just workplace banter. But something strange started happening. The more they talked about it, the more she found herself thinking about it. Late at night, she'd sit at her piano and imagine what it would be like. Just once, just to see if she still had it. The idea was terrifying and thrilling at the same time. She started playing a little more regularly at home. Not much, just enough to shake off some of the rust. Her fingers remembered more than she expected. The muscle memory was still there, buried under years of neglect, but not gone. Not completely. Then came the Friday that changed everything. Rebecca arrived for her evening shift and immediately knew something was off. Frank was pacing behind the counter, running his hand through his thinning hair, something he only did when he was stressed. The chalkboard advertising open mic night was already set up outside, and there were more people than usual waiting by the door even though it was still early. "What's going on?" she asked Danny as she tied on her apron. "All 3 performers canceled," he said, shaking his head. "Frank's losing it. The comedian got food poisoning, the singer's car broke down, and the guitar player just flaked. We've got nothing. Can't he just cancel? There are already people here specifically for the show. You see them waiting? Plus he advertised it on social media. He's worried about disappointing everyone." Rebecca felt a small knot forming in her stomach. She had a bad feeling about where this was going. The diner filled up quickly. By 7 o'clock, every table was full, and there were people standing in the back. The crowd was in good spirits, chatting and eating, expecting a show. Frank kept looking at the clock, hoping someone would show up, but nobody did. At 7:30, Frank made an announcement. "Folks, I'm really sorry, but we've had all our performers cancel tonight. I'm afraid we're not going to be able to do the open mic." A collective groan went through the crowd. People had come specifically for this. Some had even brought friends. Frank looked genuinely distressed, apologizing repeatedly. That's when Danny decided to take matters into his own hands. "Wait," he shouted from the kitchen door. "We have a performer." Rebecca's blood went cold. No, he wouldn't. Our very own Rebecca here is an amazing piano player. She studied music in college. Every eye in the diner turned to her. She was holding a coffee pot, frozen in the middle of refilling someone's cup. The entire room had gone silent. "Danny, no," she said quietly, but her voice barely carried in the crowded space. "Come on, Rebecca," someone from the crowd shouted. It was Mr. Chen, Mrs. Chen's husband, one of the regulars. "We'd love to hear you play." "Please," called out another voice. "We came all this way!" Frank was looking at her with desperate, hopeful eyes. Maria was grinning and nodding encouragingly. The entire staff was watching her, and half the diner was clapping and cheering. "I can't," Rebecca said, loud enough for people to hear now. "I haven't played in front of people in years. I'm really rusty, we don't mind." Someone called out, "Yeah, come on. Give it a shot." The pressure was building. More people were clapping, calling out encouragement. These were her regulars, people she'd served for 3 years, people who smiled at her every time she took their order and left her generous tips. They weren't trying to make her uncomfortable, they were genuinely excited. But Rebecca felt like the walls were closing in. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. If she ever played again, it was supposed to be on her terms when she was ready, not thrust into it in front of a crowd of people while she was wearing her work uniform. "There's no piano," she said, grasping at straws. Frank's face lit up. "Actually, there is. I've got an old upright in the storage room. Been there since before I bought this place. Let me get some of the guys to help me bring it out. No escape route there." "Frank, I really don't think this is a good idea," Rebecca tried one more time. But he was already heading to the storage room with Danny and Luis following behind him. The crowd was buzzing now, excited about this unexpected turn of events. People were pulling out their phones, texting friends to come down. A few were already recording, expecting something interesting to happen. Rebecca stood there, coffee pot still in hand, feeling like she might throw up. This was her nightmare scenario. Forced on stage, unprepared, in front of everyone she knew. What if she messed up? What if her fingers didn't work the way they used to? What if she humiliated herself in front of all these people? But another voice in her head whispered something different. What if this was her chance? What if this was the universe pushing her back toward something she'd given up on? What if she could actually do this? When the men emerged from the storage room rolling out an old, slightly beaten-up upright piano, the crowd erupted in cheers. They positioned it near the small area Frank had set up as a stage, and Danny quickly tested the keys. Some were slightly out of tune, but it was playable. Everyone was looking at her again, waiting, hoping. Rebecca set down the coffee pot slowly, her hands shaking. She untied her apron with trembling fingers and hung it on the hook by the kitchen door. Every movement felt like it was happening in slow motion. "You've got this," Maria whispered as she walked past, giving her arm a gentle squeeze. The walk from the serving area to the piano felt like a mile long. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The crowd had fallen silent again, watching her approach the instrument. She sat down on the bench and suddenly it felt familiar. How many hours had she spent sitting just like this? Thousands? Tens of thousands? Her body remembered, even if her mind was screaming at her to run. Rebecca's hands hovered over the keys, not quite touching them yet. The silence in the diner was complete. No one was eating, no one was talking. Even the kitchen had gone quiet. All she could hear was her own breathing and the hammering of her heart. She looked down at her hands. Waitress hands now, with a small burn scar on her left thumb from a coffee pot, and a callus on her right palm from carrying trays. But they were still her hands, the same ones that had won competitions, that had played in recitals, that had once made beautiful music. What was she going to play? She hadn't planned for this. Her mind raced through her old repertoire, pieces she'd performed years ago. Some were too complicated. She'd never pull them off without practice. Others were too simple. They wouldn't justify this build-up. Then it came to her. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2. It was the piece she'd played at her final recital at community college, the last time she'd performed for an audience, the last time she'd let herself be a musician instead of just a waitress who used to play piano. She took a breath and let her fingers settle onto the keys. They felt cool under her touch, familiar despite the years. The piano wasn't in perfect condition. She could tell that from just resting her hands on it. Some of the keys would probably stick and the tuning was off in places, but it would do. It would have to do. The first note came out soft, tentative, then the second. Her fingers moved almost on their own, finding the melody buried somewhere in her muscle memory. The opening was simple, delicate, like a question being asked in the darkness. She hit a wrong note in the third measure and winced. Her fingers had slipped, gone to the wrong key. A wave of panic washed over her, see? This was why she didn't play anymore. She wasn't good enough. She was out of practice, rusty, and now everyone was going to know it. But something made her keep going. Maybe it was the years of discipline from her training. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the simple fact that stopping now would be even more humiliating than pushing through. Her fingers found their way back to the melody and she continued. By the second page, if she'd had the sheet music in front of her, which she didn't, something began to shift. Her body was remembering things her mind had forgotten. The way her shoulders should relax, the way her wrists should stay loose, the way her fingers should arc over the keys. Years of training were waking up, shaking off the dust. The melody grew stronger, more confident. This piece was like a conversation between two voices, the right hand singing the main theme while the left hand provided a gentle, rolling accompaniment. She'd always loved that about Chopin, the way he could make the piano sound like it was singing, like it had a human voice. And then something unexpected happened. Rebecca stopped thinking. She wasn't in Miller's diner anymore. She wasn't thinking about the crowd watching her or the mistakes she might make. She wasn't worrying about her rusty technique or her years away from music. She was just playing. The music took over and she let it. Her hands moved faster, more fluid, dancing across the keys with a confidence she hadn't felt in years. The difficult runs that used to make her practice for hours suddenly felt natural, effortless. The ornamentations, those little flourishes and trills that make Chopin so distinctive, flowed out without conscious thought. She was 14 again, playing in her first real competition, feeling the thrill of losing herself completely in the music. She was 17, staying after school to practice for hours because she couldn't bear to stop, because the piano was the only place where everything made sense. She was 19, playing this exact piece in the college auditorium while her parents beamed from the front row, and her mother who was sick but had insisted on coming, wiped tears from her eyes. The memories flooded through her, not as painful reminders of what she'd lost, but as affirmations of who she'd been, who she still was underneath everything else. The music swelled, reaching the most passionate section of the piece. This was the part that had always given her chills, where Chopin takes the simple opening melody and transforms it into something urgent, something that aches with beauty. Her right hand climbed higher on the keyboard while her left hand rolled through complex chord progressions. And somehow, impossibly, it all came together. Tears started falling, and she couldn't stop them. They rolled down her cheeks and dropped onto the keys, onto her hands, but she kept playing. She couldn't stop now. She couldn't stop because this felt like coming home after being lost for years. This felt like finding a part of herself she'd thought was dead and discovering it had just been sleeping, waiting for this moment. Every emotion she'd buried for the past 3 years came pouring out through her fingertips. The grief of giving up her dreams. The guilt of resenting her mother's illness even though it wasn't anyone's fault. The frustration of pouring coffee when she should have been performing. The exhaustion of pretending she was okay with the life she'd ended up living. The fear that she'd waited too long, that she'd missed her chance, that she'd never be the musician she was meant to be. But also hope. Hope that maybe it wasn't too late. Hope that this feeling, this incredible, indescribable feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, could be part of her life again. The technical difficulty of the piece didn't matter anymore. She wasn't thinking about which finger went where or how to shape a phrase. She was just feeling it, living it, breathing it. This was why she'd fallen in love with music in the first place. Not for the competitions or the praise or even the beauty of the sound itself, but for this feeling of complete and total connection, of becoming something more than just herself. The piano, old and slightly out of tune as it was, sang under her hands. Every note rang clear, filling the small diner with sound. The acoustic wasn't ideal. This wasn't a concert hall with perfect acoustics, but somehow that made it more real, more honest. She reached the climax of the piece, the moment where everything comes together in a cascade of emotion. Her hands stretched across the keyboard, pulling out every ounce of feeling the instrument could produce. This was the part that had always made audiences hold their breath, the part where the music seems to stop time itself. And then gradually the piece began to wind down. The passion faded into something quieter, more contemplative, like someone slowly waking from a beautiful dream. The melody became simpler again, softer, gentler. The left hand settled into a steady, peaceful rhythm. Rebecca played the final measures with her eyes closed, savoring every note. The piece was ending, and she didn't want it to end. She didn't want to go back to reality, to being just a waitress in a small diner. For these few minutes, she'd been Rebecca the pianist again, and it had felt so right. The last note rang out pure and clear. She let it sustain, her foot on the pedal, letting the sound fade naturally into silence. Even after the note died away, she kept her hands on the keys, her eyes closed, frozen in the moment. She was afraid to open her eyes, afraid to face whatever came next. The spell would be broken, and she'd have to deal with the reality of what she'd just done, performing in front of all these people, crying in front of them, showing them a part of herself she'd kept hidden for so long. The silence stretched on. It felt like an eternity. She could feel her heart still racing, Feel the tears still wet on her face, feel the slight tremor in her hands that always came after an intense performance. Why wasn't anyone saying anything? Had she messed up worse than she thought? Had the emotion been too much, too raw? Maybe they were embarrassed for her, watching her cry through a piano piece like some kind of breakdown. She finally forced herself to open her eyes, prepared for the worst. What she saw took her breath away. The diner was completely still, every person frozen in place. But they weren't looking away in discomfort or embarrassment. They were staring at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. And then she realized, many of them were crying too. Old Mr. Chen had his arm around his wife, and both of them had tears streaming down their faces. The construction workers who usually came in loud and boisterous sat silent at their booth, one of them wiping his eyes with his napkin. A young mother holding a toddler was openly sobbing, her shoulders shaking. Frank stood by the kitchen door with his arms crossed over his chest, and tears were running freely down his weathered face. Maria had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide and glistening. Even Danny, tough guy Danny with his tattoos and his gruff exterior, was suspiciously wiping at his eyes with his sleeve. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything. The silence felt sacred, like no one wanted to be the first to break it, to shatter whatever had just happened in that room. Rebecca looked out at all these faces, people she served breakfast to every morning, people whose orders she knew by heart, people who were part of her daily routine, and saw them transformed. They weren't just customers anymore. In this moment, they were an audience who had just experienced something profound, something that had reached into them and touched something deep. She had done that. With her music, with her emotion, with her truth, she had connected with these people in a way she never had while taking their orders or refilling their coffee cups. She'd shown them who she really was, and instead of turning away, they had seen her. Really, truly seen her. Someone in the back started clapping. Just one person at first, slow and deliberate. Then another joined in. Then another. And suddenly the entire diner erupted into applause, loud and thunderous and genuine. People were standing up, still crying, still clapping, some of them cheering. The applause washed over Rebecca like a wave, and she sat frozen at the piano bench, unable to process what was happening. Her hands were still trembling, and she could feel her whole body shaking now that the performance was over. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving her exhausted and raw. People were standing, all of them. A standing ovation in a small-town diner for a waitress who hadn't performed in years. It didn't seem real. None of this seemed real. Mrs. Chen was the first to approach, moving slowly because of her bad hip but determined to reach the piano. Her face was wet with tears, and she grabbed Rebecca's hands in her own wrinkled ones. "Dear girl," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "All this time, all these years I've been coming here and I never knew. You have a gift, a real gift. Thank you," Rebecca managed to whisper, still too overwhelmed to form proper sentences. Then others started coming forward. A line formed, people waiting to speak to her, to thank her, to tell her how the music had moved them. Each person had something to say. The construction worker with the tattoo sleeve approached, looking slightly embarrassed about his earlier tears. "My daughter takes piano lessons," he said gruffly. "She wants to quit because it's too hard. I'm going to tell her about you, about what you just did." A teenage girl who Rebecca had never seen before stepped up next. "I'm learning this piece right now," she said shyly. "I've been struggling with it for months, but watching you play it, you made me understand it for the first time. Like, really understand what it's supposed to feel like." "My mother loved Chopin," an elderly man said quietly. "She passed away last year. Hearing you play that tonight, it felt like she was here with me again. Thank you." Each comment hit Rebecca like a physical thing. She'd forgotten this part of performing, how music could create these connections, how it could reach into people's lives and touch places they'd forgotten existed. When you're practicing alone in your apartment, you forget that music is meant to be shared, meant to move people, meant to create these moments of genuine human connection. Frank finally made his way through the crowd. His eyes were still red, and he kept wiping at them like he was embarrassed to be caught crying. He put his hand on her shoulder and didn't say anything for a long moment, just looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Rebecca," he finally said, his voice rough. "I had no idea. All this time you've been serving eggs and burgers, and I had no idea who you really were. I'm still just your waitress, she said, trying to smile through her own tears. No. He shook his head firmly. No, you're not. You're an artist. A real one. And we've been wasting you. You gave me a job when I needed one. I gave you a job, yes, but... He paused, searching for words. You need to do something with this. You can't let this die. Promise me you won't let this die. Before Rebecca could respond, a woman in her mid-40s approached. She was well-dressed, wearing what looked like expensive business casual clothes, and she'd been sitting in one of the back booths. Rebecca vaguely remembered serving her earlier, but there'd been so many people tonight. Excuse me, the woman said, her voice professional but warm. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I needed to speak with you. My name is Patricia Green. I teach piano at the Riverside Arts Academy. She pulled out a business card and pressed it into Rebecca's hand. Rebecca stared at it, the gold lettering swimming in her vision. We're always looking for talented instructors, Patricia continued. But more than that, we have a program for students whose families can't afford private lessons. Kids who have potential but no opportunity. We're desperately understaffed, and after hearing you play tonight, she paused, emotion flickering across her professional demeanor. I think you could change lives. These kids need someone who understands what it's like to struggle, someone who plays with real feeling, not just technical precision. Would you be willing to meet with me next week? Just to talk? Rebecca looked down at the card in her trembling hand. A job teaching music. An actual music job. The thing she'd been searching for 3 years ago when she'd ended up at the diner instead. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, I'd like that. Patricia smiled, genuinely pleased. Wonderful. My cell number's on the card. Call me Monday and we'll set something up. And Rebecca? She glanced back at the piano. That was extraordinary, really. I've been to concerts at Carnegie Hall that didn't move me half as much as what you just did here. As Patricia walked away, Rebecca felt Maria grab her arm. Her fellow waitress was grinning so wide it looked like her face might split. Did that just happen? Maria whispered urgently. Did you just get offered a real music job? I think so. I'm not sure. Everything's kind of a blur right now. This is incredible. This is what you should be doing. Not slinging hash with me. No offense to hash slinging. Rebecca laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. I still can't believe any of this is happening. More people wanted to talk to her. A wedding planner asked if she'd be interested in playing for events. A man who ran a local community center wondered if she'd perform at their fundraiser next month. Another person wanted to know if she gave private lessons. The questions and offers kept coming, overwhelming her with possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to imagine in years. Danny eventually rescued her, announcing loudly that the performer needed a break and could people please give her some space. The crowd reluctantly dispersed back to their tables, though the energy in the diner had completely transformed. People were talking excitedly, animated in a way they hadn't been before. The whole atmosphere had shifted. Rebecca stumbled back toward the kitchen on shaky legs. Maria got her a glass of water while Danny pulled out a chair and made her sit down. You okay? He asked, looking slightly worried. That was intense. I don't know what I am, Rebecca admitted, gulping the water. Her hands were still shaking so badly she could barely hold the glass. I feel like I'm going to wake up any second and find out this was all a dream. Not a dream, Maria assured her. Very real. And very amazing. Rebecca, why didn't you tell us you could do that? I didn't think I could anymore, she said honestly. I haven't performed in years. I was so scared I'd forgotten how, or that I'd mess up, or that people would hate it. Hate it? Danny laughed. Were you in the same room we were in? People were crying. Grown construction workers were crying. I still can't believe you pushed me into that, Rebecca said. But there was no anger in her voice, just exhaustion and wonder. Hey, someone had to. Danny grinned. You never would have done it on your own. You're too busy hiding your light under whatever that saying is. Frank came into the kitchen then, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked at Rebecca for a long moment, his expression serious. I mean what I said out there, he told her quietly. You can't let this go. I've owned this place for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what just happened. You connected with people. Really connected. That's rare, Rebecca. That matters. I'm not sure what to do with it, she admitted. It's been so long, I don't even know where to start. Start with that teacher's card in your pocket, Frank suggested. Start with saying yes to opportunities. Start with believing that you deserve this. He paused, then added, I'll work with your schedule, whatever you need. If you want to cut back hours to pursue music, we'll figure it out. I'm not going to be the reason you give up on this again. Rebecca felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Really? Thank you. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. More people came up to talk to her between serving tables. Someone had recorded part of her performance on their phone and was showing it to newcomers who'd arrived too late to see it live. The video looked grainy and the sound quality wasn't great, but you could still see her at the piano, completely lost in the music, tears streaming down her face. Watching herself on that screen was surreal. She looked different than she remembered, not like a scared waitress pretending to be a musician, but like a real performer, someone confident and genuine. She'd forgotten that version of herself existed. By the time the diner closed that night, Rebecca felt like she'd lived an entire year in one evening. Her feet hurt from standing all day, her eyes were puffy from crying, and she was more emotionally drained than she'd been in ages. But underneath the exhaustion was something else, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Possibility. As she drove home through the quiet streets, Patricia's business card sitting on her passenger seat, Rebecca couldn't stop thinking about the faces in the crowd. The way people had looked at her, really looked at her and seen something worth seeing. The way the music had reached them, moved them, changed something in the room. That was what she'd been missing all these years. Not the applause or the recognition, though those were nice. What she'd been missing was the connection. The feeling of sharing something true and beautiful with other people and having them receive it, understand it, feel it in their own hearts. When she got home, she didn't cover the piano back up. Instead, she sat down and played for another hour, pieces she hadn't touched in years flowing out of her like they'd been waiting all this time. Her upstairs neighbor probably hated her. It was past midnight, but she couldn't stop. She played everything she could remember. The Chopin that had started it all tonight, some Debussy, a bit of Mozart, some contemporary pieces she'd learned in college. Her fingers stumbled sometimes, missed notes, had to stop and figure out passages she'd forgotten. But it didn't matter. She was playing again. Really playing, not just going through the motions during occasional late-night sessions. She was a musician again. Finally, exhausted beyond measure, she stopped and just sat there at the piano, hands resting on the keys. Tomorrow she'd call Patricia. Tomorrow she'd start figuring out what came next. Tomorrow she'd begin the process of rebuilding a life that included music, not just as a painful memory, but as a living, breathing part of her present and future. But tonight, for now, she just sat with the feeling. The feeling of having taken a terrifying leap and discovered she could still fly. Monday morning came with a different feeling than usual. Rebecca woke up earlier than her alarm, which never happened. For once, she didn't dread the day ahead. She lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, Patricia's business card sitting on her nightstand where she'd placed it before going to sleep. Should she really call? What if Friday night had been a fluke, a one-time moment of magic that couldn't be repeated? What if she got to the academy and realized she wasn't qualified enough, professional enough, good enough? Then she remembered the faces in the diner, Mrs. Chen's tears, the construction worker talking about his daughter, the teenage girl who said Rebecca had helped her understand the music for the first time. That had been real. That had mattered. She picked up her phone before she could talk herself out of it. Patricia answered on the second ring, her voice bright and professional. This is Patricia. Hi, this is Rebecca. From the diner on Friday night? Rebecca! I'm so glad you called. I was hoping you would. Are you free any time this week to come by the academy? They set up a meeting for Wednesday afternoon. Rebecca's hands were shaking again when she hung up, but this time it was nervous excitement instead of fear. At the diner that day, everything felt different. People kept coming up to her table, telling her they'd heard about Friday night from friends who'd been there. A few people showed her the video that had been posted on social media. Apparently someone had shared it and it was making rounds in the local community. You're famous, Maria teased during a quiet moment. Local waitress has secret talent, news at 11. I'm not famous, Rebecca protested, but she couldn't help smiling. It's just people being nice. It's people recognizing what's been right in front of them the whole time, Frank corrected, passing by with a tray of clean glasses. Sometimes it takes a moment like Friday to make people really see. Wednesday arrived faster than Rebecca expected. She'd agonized over what to wear, finally settling on simple black pants and a nice blouse. Professional but not trying too hard. She'd even printed out her old resume from community college, though it felt outdated and inadequate. The Riverside Arts Academy was housed in a renovated historic building on the edge of downtown. Rebecca had driven past it 100 times but never really looked at it. Now, standing in front of the entrance, she felt her stomach doing flips. Inside, the building was beautiful. High ceilings, natural light pouring through tall windows, and most importantly, the sound of music. Piano from one room, violin from another, someone singing scales somewhere upstairs. It was like walking into a different world. Patricia met her in the lobby and gave her a tour. The facility had practice rooms, performance spaces, studios for different instruments. But what caught Rebecca's attention most was the community outreach wing. "This is where our scholarship students come," Patricia explained, leading her down a corridor lined with smaller practice rooms. "These are kids whose families can't afford traditional private lessons. Some are incredibly talented but have never had access to quality instruction. That's where we come in." She stopped in front of a window looking into a small classroom. Inside, a boy who couldn't have been more than 10 was struggling through a simple piece, his face screwed up in concentration. "That's Marcus," Patricia said softly. "His mother cleans office buildings at night to support him and his 2 siblings. She heard him picking out melodies on a toy keyboard when he was 5, and somehow, despite everything, managed to save up for a real keyboard. He's been teaching himself from YouTube videos. He has raw talent, but he needs real guidance." Rebecca watched the boy play, seeing herself in his determined expression. "How many students are in the program?" "We have capacity for 40, but we're only serving 23 right now because we don't have enough instructors. We had to turn away 17 kids last semester." Patricia's voice was heavy with regret. 17 children who wanted to learn, who had potential, and we had to tell them no because we didn't have the staff. Something clicked into place in Rebecca's chest. This wasn't just about her returning to music. This was about giving other people the chance she'd almost lost herself. They talked for over an hour. Patricia explained that the position would be part-time to start, 3 afternoons a week teaching in the scholarship program, with potential to grow. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it was enough that, combined with reduced hours at the diner, Rebecca could make it work. "I want to be honest with you," Patricia said as they sat in her office. "This isn't glamorous work. These kids come from tough situations. Some have chaotic home lives. Some don't have instruments to practice on between lessons. It can be frustrating and heartbreaking, but it's also the most rewarding thing I've ever done." "When can I start?" Rebecca asked. Patricia smiled. "How about Monday?" That Friday night at the diner, open mic night rolled around again. Word had gotten out that Rebecca might perform, and the place was packed beyond capacity. People were standing in the back, sitting on the floor near the walls, crowded around the entrance. "You don't have to do this," Frank told her quietly. "I know last week was intense, but Rebecca felt different now. She'd spent the week playing every night, remembering pieces, practicing, preparing. She'd also made a decision. "I want to," she said simply. This time, when she sat at the piano, she wasn't terrified. She was nervous, sure, but it was the good kind of nervous, the kind performers get when they're excited to share something with an audience. She played 3 pieces that night. The Chopin again, because people requested it, then Debussy's Arabesque No. 1, which was lighter and more playful. Finally, she played a contemporary piece by Ludovico Einaudi that she'd always loved. Something modern that showed music wasn't just about old classical composers. The response was just as powerful as the first time, maybe more so because now people knew what to expect and came specifically to experience it. But for Rebecca, the performance felt different. Less like a surprise release of pent-up emotion and more like a deliberate choice to share her gift. After she finished, Patricia approached with a young girl in tow. The girl looked about 12, shy, hiding slightly behind Patricia's arm. "Rebecca, this is Destiny. She's one of our scholarship students. I told her you were starting next week and she wanted to meet you." The girl looked up at Rebecca with wide eyes. "Miss Patricia says you're going to be teaching piano." "That's right," Rebecca said, kneeling down to be at the girl's eye level. "Do you play?" Destiny nodded. "A little bit. My grandma has an old keyboard, but half the keys don't work right. Miss Patricia says maybe the academy can get me a better one to practice on." "What kind of music do you like?" I don't know, the girl said softly. I've never really heard much, just what's on the radio, but Miss Patricia played me some recordings of people playing piano, and it made me feel. She struggled to find the word. Like I wanted to cry, but in a good way. Rebecca felt her throat tighten. I know exactly what you mean. Do you think you could teach me to play like you do? Destiny asked. Like so people feel things? I can try, Rebecca promised. If you're willing to work hard. I am, Destiny said with sudden fierceness. I'll work really, really hard. Watching the girl's face light up with hope and determination, Rebecca understood something she hadn't fully grasped before. Music had never really been about her becoming famous or performing in prestigious concert halls. It had always been about connection, about communication, about taking the feelings that lived too deep for words and giving them voice. She'd thought she'd given up on music when she started at the diner, but maybe music had just been waiting for the right time to come back. Maybe all those years serving coffee and burgers hadn't been wasted time but preparation for this moment, for understanding how to connect with regular people, for learning humility and patience and the value of simply showing up day after day. The following Monday, Rebecca started at the academy. Her first student was a 9-year-old boy who'd never touched a piano before. Watching his face as he discovered that pressing different keys made different sounds, seeing his wonder at realizing he could create music himself, Rebecca felt something settle into place in her soul. This was where she was meant to be. She kept working at the diner, but reduced her hours to 3 shifts a week. Frank was true to his word, accommodating her schedule and celebrating every small victory. The regulars continued to follow her journey, asking about her students, requesting updates, showing up to the academy's occasional free concerts. The wedding planner who'd approached her that first night hired her for 3 events. Rebecca played at anniversaries, birthday parties, and community gatherings. Each performance was different, each audience unique. Sometimes she played classical pieces, sometimes jazz, sometimes contemporary music. She was building a repertoire again, remembering old favorites and learning new ones. 6 months after that first unexpected performance, the academy held a recital for the scholarship students. Rebecca sat in the audience watching her students perform pieces they'd learned together. Destiny played a simplified version of that Chopin nocturne, the one Rebecca had performed on that transformative Friday night. The girl's technique wasn't perfect and she made mistakes, but she played with feeling, with heart, with genuine emotion. When Destiny finished, she looked straight at Rebecca and smiled. And Rebecca understood that this was what success actually looked like. Not awards or prestigious venues, but this moment of connection, of passing something beautiful on to the next generation, of keeping music alive in the world. After the recital, Mrs. Chen approached Rebecca. The elderly woman had been coming to every performance, becoming something like a grandmother figure to the scholarship students. You know, Mrs. Chen said, when I first met you at the diner, I thought you were a wonderful waitress. And you were. But watching you now, seeing what you do with these children, I realized that waitress was just your chrysalis. This, she gestured at the room full of young musicians and proud families. This is you emerging as what you were always meant to be. Rebecca hugged her, feeling tears prick her eyes again. I never would have had the courage to start playing again if people like you hadn't believed in me that night.